3, 2, 1. Okay, so welcome to my YouTube channel where I'm providing logic videos for my introduction to logic. Now, there are a few things to note about the course shell that we should pay attention to. First off, right, I'm Dr. Hackett. I am the assistant professor of philosophy at Southern University, A&M College, main flagship campus in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Now let's actually start with section 1.1. First, I'm going to take a look at the webcam and see where on this board I can write. So give me a second to map out the contours of my board. Right here is the corner. Down here, over here, go over to about. Woo, this is actually pretty wide. I have most of the board up down here. Okay, so that's kind of the square that I'm going to try to be in. All right, so now, arguments. Logic is the normative study and evaluation of arguments. Let me write that down. Logic is the study and evaluation of arguments. So for our purposes in this class, arguments takes on a very specific technical term. Now, arguments are not conflicts, right? Sometimes in counseling or psychiatry, you are told that when your family's in recovery, you might go see a counselor, right? And you might have quarrels or power conflicts, right? That's not what we mean by argument, right? The popular definition of argument involves the idea of screaming and shouting to each other, but there's actually a more technical term for argumentation, right? So arguments can be broken down into parts about what make them up. And this is the reason when we study and evaluate arguments, we're evaluating their form, what goes into their makeup. And that's why we also call that this is a course in formal logic, right? So what is an argument if we can break it down in its component parts? Now, most of you are actually students of nursing at Southern University. So let's talk about a cell for a second, right? The one class that either makes or breaks nursing majors, one of the hardest in their first year, is always the physiology and anatomy course. It depends on where you go or what program you're studying at, right? But it's the one course where we understand the human body, not by defining it like the human body is that which, we actually break it down into component parts. In this way, we give a compositional definition. So you understand a cell by virtue of looking at a diagram. You see the mitochondria, right? You see the endoplasmic reticulum, you see the nucleus, right? You see the cytoplasm, right? That's all the parts that actually make up a cell. And the biological definition breaks it down into component parts. So by analogy, we can also do the same thing with arguments. And arguments are a little bit simpler than cells, right? So let's take a look. Now, the first and most fundamental unit of analysis in logic is the word statement. And so a statement is any declarative sentence that can be considered true or false, right? So any declarative sentence that's true or false, right? So, and any declarative statement that's true or false. So the things that make up arguments are the types of things that are true or false. And that matters to us, right? So let me give you an example of an argument made up of statements. I'll introduce the technical terms for the position of where these statements are in an argument in a moment, but we're just going to talk about it very briefly. Now, just to let you know, I'm kind of making this video in anticipation of the SU Online course, and we're putting it on posterity. But just to give you a reference, it's May 26, 2022 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So the following argument is made in reference to this day. And I'm just going to put this on the board. It's 5:26 out, and the weather forecast is 86 degrees Fahrenheit today. So here is an argument. All right. Premise 1. There are clouds in the sky. Conclusion. It is going to snow today. Now, this technically has the component parts. I'll introduce those in a moment, but here's a statement. There are clouds in the sky today, right? That's true. There are clouds. Very sunny, partly cloudy day. My wife and I took a walk today on campus. In case you didn't know this, my wife actually works here. But like we went on the bluff, a wonderful day. So there are clouds in the sky today. That's true. That's a statement. It's going to snow today. Well, all evidence to the contrary, it's not cold enough for there to be snow, right? Now, up in the upper atmosphere, like if you're 10,000 feet above the earth where it's about 17 degrees Fahrenheit and you're in a plane, right? Yes, it could possibly somehow some precipitation might be up there. But the atmospheric conditions for it to snow as far as our observations today is that this would have to be false. So this first definition of statement does give us a little bit of intuitive power to sort of analyze this as an argument. So now this is an online class, so I'm going to pause, and I want you to maybe think. I'm going to pause for about 30 seconds and just jot down what's wrong with this argument. Try to put it in your own words. I'm going to pause for a second. Is this a good argument? Okay. Now that we've actually given you some time to sort of think about it, this isn't technically a very good argument, but it has the parts of an argument. So let's actually hold that question in our mind, and maybe we can say something a little bit more about this argument once we know a little bit more about its structure. All right, so now the reason I put P1 here is that the statement that supports the conclusion, or that's supposed to support the conclusion, is called a premise, right? So premise, singular, I'll put a little hyphen for premises, right? And arguments need to have at least one premise and one conclusion. Those are the parts of their names, right? So premise or premises are, is/are statements that support the conclusion. You could kind of, over the years, I've had various analogies about how you might think about what premises play the role in argumentation. And I think this is actually worth most, right? So think about, I'm going to be kind of crazy for a second. Think about Beyonce. I know we're like talking about logic and then we switch to Beyonce. It'll make sense, trust me. Beyonce is a major musical tour de force in pop culture, right? Now, here's another HBO, but Curb Your Enthusiasm, right, was a show about a comedian and his adventures with his group that organized everything for him. And I think that, or maybe it was the show Entourage, I'm trying to think of. Anyway, regardless, right? But Beyonce has a group of people who do things for her. She doesn't pick her own wardrobe and design her wardrobe. She might have designers that come to her. She might make final decisions about what she wears on stage, right? But she works with dance choreographers, right? She doesn't have controls and do the lights when she's up there singing, right? She's not the mic person. She's not the audiovisual person. She's got support for every show that she puts on. So an argument is kind of like a Beyonce concert, or Beyonce herself, depending on how you want to extend this metaphor. The premises are the evidentiary support that supports the conclusion. The conclusion never supports the premises. This is a top-down structure. Right? And at the end of the day, the reason why the analogy with the Beyonce concert kind of works well is it's Beyonce's concert. If she doesn't want a yellow dress, she's not going to wear a yellow dress, right? She's in total control. The conclusion is what you go see, like going to see Beyonce at the concert, right? Now, there's a lot of things that support and make the concert happen, and I guess the concert is the argument in question, but the conclusion is really what you want, right? The conclusion is the thing that's supported. And the question here is, does this statement alone support this conclusion? So if you wrote something like, well, and I was trying to see what your intuitions are, right? This argument seems to be ignoring key premises or other pieces of evidence that would immediately make the fact that the conclusion cannot follow from the premises listed. Now, it's true, anytime it snows in Cleveland, Ohio, or Pittsburgh, the section of the country where I'm from, there are clouds in the sky. But the presence of clouds in the sky is not the only piece of evidence that you need for there to be snow on the ground, right? You need it to be winter, first of all, in North America and the Northern Hemisphere, right? You need cold temperatures in the atmosphere, and you also need cold temperatures on the ground so the snow doesn't melt, right? So when the snowflake gets down here, sometimes it'll snow and it'll be like 50 degrees out and then immediately touches the ground and turns to water. That might be the only level of snow that we ever see. And it's improbable that it will snow. Something's possible, but highly improbable that it could possibly snow. And there might be some freak arrangement of meteorological patterns where it could possibly snow in May. But it's always going to be so unlikely that it's nearly almost a 95% probability, perhaps, that it's always going to be warm out in May. At least warm enough that snow doesn't occur. So the premise would support an argument that would say it's snow, but you would need other premises in addition to the fact that there are clouds in the sky to support this as the conclusion, and the conditions would have to be right for it, right? Just by me telling you that it's May 26th and it's 86 degrees Fahrenheit outside, you and I know not going to snow. So this is a bad argument, right? We have insufficient premises to support the conclusion. And even though the premise is trivial true, it alone cannot actually support the conclusion that's listed there. But structurally, this is an argument. And the other piece of the thing is the conclusion. The conclusion is the statement supported by the premises. So every argument has at least one of these, right? So there's at least one. I'm going to put 1 plus, there's one or more, right? And then there's this one. So a minimum structure of every argument is there's at least one premise and one conclusion. So the minimum amount of statements that make up an argument are exactly 2 or more. Right? Now you can have really complicated arguments with many premises, right, adding to the conclusion of something. So let's take a look at perhaps a better argument than this one, but we'll keep this here, right? So let me think of an idea here. Okay. So here's an argument Let's stick with the weather. Premise 1. It's sunny and warm out today. Therefore, it's above 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it's sunny and warm out today. Therefore, it's above 7 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a little better of an argument, right? It's sunny and warm out today. Maybe we might need a, right? And that says it's at least above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And so in the South, when you use the word sunny and warm, well, it's going to be about like in the 80s or so, right? Now, if you're from the North, you say it's sunny and warm. Could be different, but I'm just meaning these terms in sort of the local context that we find ourselves in Baton Rouge. Now, this is at least, now it's trivial true, and the conclusion trivially follows. It's not a very complicated argument. We're still sticking with the weather because we haven't really proceeded anymore in the course, right? So it's sunny and warm out today. Therefore, it's above 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Now this at least works better, right? And of course, we can go a little bit more. There are more complicated arguments, right? So let me do a classic one that's in every logic textbook. How about premise 1? All men are mortal. Premise 2. Socrates is a man, right? Conclusion. Socrates is mortal. Now, this is a slightly different argument than the one I was using before. The one I was using before was actually inductive. This is an example of a deductive argument. And don't worry, we don't need to know those terms quite just yet. But what's interesting here is that this argument has such a form, right? Remember that logic's the study and evaluation of form. This is a better argument than the first argument I gave about snow. Why? Because all men are mortal. We have like a universal premise. And notice here we have two premises, right, with a certain particular form. Now we'll learn these forms in 2 sections from now, right? This is technically called a categorical syllogism. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, right? So we could kind of picture this sort of reasoning. So I'm going to draw a circle, right? And I'm going to put all mortal beings in here. And inside this circle is all mortal beings, right? And then I'm going to draw a smaller circle of an example of mortal beings. Like, so mortal beings could include gorillas, houseflies, squirrels, deer, right? Chimpanzees, and human beings. So, and of human beings, if you want to group them in terms of their biological sex, right, we would say men. Just for the purposes of this example, we'll use the classic, right? I'm going to put men. Now, inside this circle, we could have a smaller circle. Who are the men that have always existed who have been mortal, right? So we could say Jackson is mortal, I'm mortal, any member of the male class that's here is mortal. So we'll use a specific example, Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, right? And I'm just going to put an X to designate Socrates as the type. Or if you want, you could put him in a smaller circle inside men. But the point of it is, all men are mortal. Socrates is an example of a man. And then you can say, and if this is true of all men and Socrates is an example, then he's actually inside this circle. So it's true necessarily by virtue of its form, you could not help but conclude Socrates is mortal, right? And this is a really good argumentative form because if the premises are true, the conclusion is guaranteed to be true. That is a great form, and this is a great piece of reasoning in terms of a deductive categorical syllogism, and it's got really tight logical structure, right? So that's an example of a really good, and there are evaluative terms that we learn in this course that tell us why this argument is really awesome. Now, I'm not going to throw those terms at you quite just yet, but this is what logic is about. Logic is about arguments, not necessarily, right, what you argue with or the power conflicts that you have with your parents, right? And trust me, as a traditional college-age student from the ages of 18 to 22, I know there's non-traditional students who are probably watching this video too in the future, but you're 18 to 22, you will basically become your own person at university, and you will always be having a little tension with the normative self-image of what your parents want you to be versus you becoming your own person. There's a tension that is present for all students, no matter your cultural background. So, from these examples, we can now define what an argument is, given this structure. So let me just put this together, right? So, an argument is a series of statements, right? So premises are statements, conclusions are statements, right? So an argument is a series of statements, some of which is / are premise or premises, that support another statement called the conclusion, right? And this definition I will repeat throughout the course of this lecture series. If you take me as an in-person class, I basically say this so much that when I have students, they say, "Oh, well, I had you in logic." I say, "Okay, an argument is," and sometimes the students just roll the tongue. An argument is a series of statements on which the premises support conclusion, like boom, right? I'm going to keep saying that because this definition doesn't go away, and this is our first sort of series of technical terms, right? I'm always going to refer to statements that support the conclusion. Now, here's something to connect the dots. You haven't been inhabiting this structure for years. You have just called these things different names, right? You've called them, I don't know, you've called them, right? In composition class, right? What is the supporting point for your thesis, if not a premise? Right? So you have used the words like supporting reasons, right? And then the conclusion, right? This is the conclusion right here. This is just the thesis of your overall paper. So supporting reasons support your thesis. This is exactly the same structure, right? Let me go over here because I got a little bit more room over here. And this is the diagram I draw throughout the entire class, right? I draw this all the time. Say premises with an arrow going down. This supports the conclusion. And this process of drawing a conclusion out of a premise is sometimes called drawing an inference. All right, so an inference is the process of reasoning from drawing out, right? So these are the basic building blocks of what we're going to see over the course of the next few weeks. We're not going to abandon the structure. The structure is always going to be there. And some of you are like, oh my God, why am I taking logic? Why do I even need this, right? Well, think about this. If you want to say you want to become a lawyer, say you got your nursing degree, but you know that nursing's not for you, and you take the LSAT and you go to law school, for instance. Then we actually have a law school on campus, right? So what are the students who do debate club in high school and want to be lawyers? What are they doing? They're making arguments. What are people when they pursue a graduate degree and have to write a thesis for their master's? What are they doing? They're arguing for a specific conclusion in the literature of whatever major they're doing. And when you take upper division courses at university, what are you reading in those upper division courses where the experts disagree with each other and are making arguments against each other? Oh, wait, look, they're making arguments, right? So your upper division courses, maybe not your foundational freshman and sophomore year courses, because a lot of those early courses actually give you elementary concepts. And they give you elementary concepts so that when you're in the upper division courses, you don't need to relearn that stuff, right? And this way, knowledge is cumulative. But at the end of the day, if you become a professional, right, in whatever capacity, say that you work for a marketing company and there's 2 pitches, right? You're in competition with another colleague to get a certain account to market their product, right? And you have to present your idea. And you have to give reasons as to why the client should pick you over the other person you're in competition with. Again, that would involve making an argument. So everywhere you go, in every specific discourse that you inhabit at university, the bare bones skills of what's actually being done is having a logical structure to that discourse, right? So think about this. Logic is the sort of martial arts of discourse. It's the martial arts of mental reasoning. And the more empowered and more armor that you have, the less people can take advantage of you using irrational, unsupported, unsubstantiated conclusions. Think about the people that want to manipulate you. Usually for money, right? So you go to a used car lot, or you go to a car lot, maybe you have $5,000 for the down payment and you can only afford this type of payment and you want this type of car, and they're trying to upsell you everything, right? And if you let your emotions kind of get the better of you and you kind of like, you shed the armor of logic, you can get manipulated, right? So why is logic essential for life? I'm not going to try to always sell logic to you, but I will try to sell logic to you, at least in the first video of the new online course. What's really interesting about logic is you now will be empowered with a bunch of structural and evaluative criteria to look at someone's piece of reasoning and say, that's not really what I'm thinking here. Or your reasoning went awry in this particular way. Or that statement that you've just said is a claim. And what's a claim? A claim is a conclusion, right? But claims without any evidence become assertions, right? And people just assert what they believe all the time. But do they have really good evidence for what they believe? And if you start thinking this way, especially as a freshman or sophomore at university, you start thinking about, well, what is the evidence for why this conclusion should be supported? And is that evidence enough? Simply because there are clouds in the sky does not necessarily mean that it's going to snow in Louisiana. In fact, if it ever snows in Louisiana, it's going to be a rare occurrence. But say someone didn't know that, right? If they had this structure of what an argument is inside their mind, they would be better well equipped to handle a lot of the BS that gets panhandled to people, right? That people cater and pander to people's emotions without any evidence all the time. And if you start thinking this way, you could also challenge your professors. Perhaps I shouldn't say this because I work with all these people, right? But the best students in my classes are the ones that are always challenging me. And perhaps philosophy has that built into it. But think about this, like, why should I accept the professor's conclusion given the stated evidence? Perhaps there's some implicit evidence that has not been stated very explicitly that's still there, right? Or perhaps it's a controversial statement, and there's evidence both for and against. And maybe you shouldn't just take the professor's word, or the partner's word, or another lawyer's word, or a landlord's word, right? A bunch of people in this world oftentimes make headway by neglecting to be very explicit with the reasons as to why they're doing what they're doing, especially in its relationship to you and money, right? So think about real estate agents and car salesmen as the one example of where people want to manipulate you to upsell you things you may or may not need, right? So if you've got a clear head on your shoulders and you have a good logical brain, and you import this structure into any discourse, whether it's in your private life or in your upper division electives, and no matter your major, right, you will find that systemic disagreement in the academy does not abandon the rules of logic. And if it does, then it's something like propaganda or something you should listen to. So at the end of the day, why should I listen to logic? Well, go back to what statements are. Statements are any declarative sentence that's true or false. But what do we want out of logic? Logic are the tools to get us truth. And if you don't care about truth, then, what if your professors didn't care about truth? It's really important. You're now living in an age where people believe that online, people believe a bunch of things. There's even websites dedicated to false theories about how the earth is flat, or perhaps that JFK will rise again if he's been dead for 100+ years, right? Actually, he hasn't been dead for 100+ years, but he would be like 100 if he were alive, right? Or there's a bunch of different political conspiracy theories that are out there that a lot of people will manipulate emotionally the world in order to get a certain interpretation. Like there's a secret Illuminati out there controlling everything. But you show evidence to the contrary and these people just shut down because it's more comfortable to believe in some grand central mechanism of racist oppression rather than seeing how decentralized systemic racism is in a variety of different contexts, and that it is a very complicated sociological, economic, and political arrangement of things, right? So at the end of the day, oversimplified explanations that would require massive amounts of evidence to even be true, right? So you can always defeat the conspiracy theorist by saying, okay, well, what must be true in order for your belief in this conspiracy to be true? And if you trace it back, what would be the essential premises that would make such a thing true? And then you look at the actual world and say, is there evidence for that to be true? And it's easy to defeat them. And again, that's with this structure. It all starts here, right? Reasoning and logic are the epicenter of all academic discourse. And if you don't believe me on that one, then I'm going to show you a piece of evidence that I actually kind of like. Because as an academic philosopher, the word academy was founded, right? So I don't know the year. I don't have my intro to philosophy notes in front of me, but Plato was a Greek philosopher who had something called, Plato founded the academy in ancient Greece. And it was the first university, might be the first university out there, which is to say that knowledge wasn't transmitted through different societal structures, right? But Plato founded the academy. That's where we get the word academia, which is amazing. So philosophers are all really big about truth, but think about it. If your professors weren't invested or vested in the truth or seeking out the truth, even if the truth is very complicated, right? So human beings are probably causing climate change by the use of fossil fuels, but it's not just fossil fuels, right? It's our land management usage, like the deforestation, like we need a parking lot here. We're getting rid of the very organisms that breathe and recycle air, right? So a variety of things. And as we grow more in sort of technical apparatus. We will reason more about the world, and our initial thoughts about how human beings' behavior is a contributing factor to climate change, that will probably get more refined as our science and our capabilities increase with the knowledge that gets produced now, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, right? But I can guarantee you, I'm so certain, I bet my left pinky, that the people who are writing 200 years from now, the professors at universities that might be floating in the sky or whatever, if you know, are invested in truth. Truth is at the heart of the structure of an argument. So in this video, what I've done is I've reviewed, right, the basic conceptual distinctions that start this course. I won't do a homework review in these videos. There's going to be a separate homework review where I might go through like 5 or 6 problems, and that would be posted separately. Again, these are all links to my YouTube channel, but I'm converting them from MS Teams and then putting them there. So I'm still learning how to make videos. If this video survives and I learn how to do it better, I apologize, right? But for right now, just to review, an argument is made of statements. Statements are the basic unit analysis of all logic, right? We're not concerned about other forms of speech like poetry or poetic expressions or song lyrics. We're only considered about statements that are truth apt, right? That are true or false. And then an argument is made of premises and that support the conclusion. And then the conclusion is that which is supported by the premises. But this also means that this is always a premise to conclusion structure. It's always top down. It never goes up. It never goes in reverse, right? Beyonce is not the same as her entourage, so to speak. If there's more than one premises helping a really good argument, the more premises, the more evidence, usually the better. But we'll pay attention to how that structure should look, and we'll refine our vocabulary over time, right? We looked at some examples of arguments. I just tried to provide a little bit to you. And then, of course, I drew an analogy that premises are actually supporting reasons in your composition class, and that the thesis that you're trying to support, the claim that you're trying to support, is the overall conclusion, to show you that you've actually been using at least lesser refined qualitative versions of what we're going to formalize over the preceding next 2 weeks as we're inside this online course. Thank you for your time. And remember, keep thinking logically. Now I have to turn this off. There's that awkward moment where like, stop recording.